And chapter 8, chapter 8, it will just talk more about functions. So before I start, I'm requesting each and everybody to put on your cameras so that a screenshot can be taken before the class now starts. Okay, thank you very much. I
1
think
minute.
the screenshot will be taken.
Just 1 minute. Just a minute. Okay, thank you.
Thank you a lot. Put on off cameras as the screenshot has been taken. Okay, thank you a lot. Thank you once more. What I was telling you that you people that we are going to start now, chapter 8. In our last chapter, we just learned about function definition. But majorly in chapter 8, we'll learn more on functions. And when we'll touch more on function, we'll just touch on local variable, what is a local variable, and what is a global variable. This chapter won't be that long because we have covered almost 75% of the functions from chapter 6, 7, and now we are in chapter 8. So today, I have got other errands I want to teach for 2 hours. I'll just go for 1 hour. So I will teach for the first 40 minutes, and then I'll give room for questions for the remaining 20 minutes. We'll start with a local variable. What do we mean by a local variable? A local variable is a variable that is defined within function. A local variable, it is a variable that is defined within functions. So you need to know the difference between a local variable and a global variable. So a local variable is just a variable that is defined within functions, and a global variable is a variable that is defined outside of all the functions, and it is not local at any particular functions. So in a layman's language, what you can say is that a local variable is a variable defined within function, and a global variable is a variable defined outside all functions. So properties of a local variable. The memory required to store a local variable is used only when the variable is in scope. The memory required to store a local variable is used only when the variable is in scope. What do I mean by saying that it is used only when the variable is in scope? This means that it is only used when you are running that program, that variable in a certain program. But after you are through with running that variable in that program, it is not stored anymore. The second property, the same variable name can be used in different function without any conflict. So when you are using a local variable, it allows the same variable name to be used in different function without any conflict. Then the third characteristic is a local variable is transitory. Uh, what is the meaning of it is transitory? It means that its value is lost in between functions invocations. So when you have invoked the function for the first time, and when you try to invoke that function again for the second time, it will be lost. So that means it is transitory. So I've given you the definition of a local variable, and I've given you the definition of a global variable. So for a local variable, we don't have any distinct code example to elaborate on it. But for a global variable, the example below is a global variable. For example, you want to make a code, and in this code, you are not a code, you want to make a program. And this program, you want it to do addition, subtraction, print, help, and quit. So the first thing, you will apply the concept that we have learned in chapter 6 and what in chapter 7. And what we have learned in chapter 7 is about function definition. You want to, what is this function definition? Function definition, you define what you intend your function to execute. And in this case, you want now to define help screen. And in this help screen, you will expect this program to display addition, subtraction, print, help, and quit. Then the same, you will expect now that your program to display the menu. And in this menu, you see, you want it maybe to return the print, help, and quit. And for it to return this input, you you have after it has returned the input, it should give you the results. And that is why now you see I have results. And for you either to do addition, subtraction, or yeah, in this case, it is addition and subtraction. You must have two arguments. You must have two arguments. So in this case, what I want you to get it right, it is not even all this example. What I want you to get it right, because when you go to give out this example, it becomes so much complex. I want you just to know the definition of a local variable that is examinable. And the second thing, I want you to know the properties. Then the second thing, I want you to know the definition of a global variable and you to know how it is assigned. Those code examples is not important for your examination certification purpose. So I would like you just to know the definition of a local variable. They are variable defined within functions. While the definition of a global variable, there are variables defined outside functions and they are not local to any particular function. And the other thing about global variable, what I want you to know is that any variable assigned within a function is local to that function. So you need to know that any variable assigned within a function is local to that function. So that is just the definition of a local variable, unless the variable is declared to be a global variable. So a global variable is normally declared, and they are declared using the global reserved word. So you have to know that the word global is a reserved word. And in chapter, I think 1, 2, and 3, we learned about reserved words. In reserved word, you cannot use a reserved word as an identifier. When you use a reserved word as an identifier, Python will just throw an error. And why will it throw an error? Because an identifier cannot be any reserved words. And I told you examples of these reserved words, they are while, if, else. Those are reserved words. So um, in this case, this global variable, it is global. We normally use a global variable using a global function, and this global function is a reserved word. Those are two important things that I want you to catch from there. The first thing, it is just the definition of a local variable, properties of a local variable, then definition of a global variable, and how this global variable is assigned. It is normally assigned using an inbuilt global function known as global. Yes, so let me look for another thing. Yes, now after we have done about global and global and local variable, the other thing which I want to go is default parameters. So as we have seen, how class may call some Python function with different numbers of parameter compare. For example, if you want to call uh, for the first input, you want to make a program that can allow now the programmer to enter the name. You will say just say A is equals to input, then the input which will prompt now the programmer to enter the name. You'll say input, enter your name. We can define our function that accept a varying number of parameters by using technique known as global default parameters. Global default parameters. So as you saw in our last in chapter what? Chapter 7, there was an incident where I wrote a program, and this program was only able to count from 1 to 10 once. And in the second case, I was able to make a program, and this program was able to write from 1 to 10 for a number of times. Uh, then for a third case, you saw that I made a program, and this program was able to count different ranges. At first, it counted from 1 to 10, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, and any range that a programmer could have fed the program with. So when you are using default parameter, what I want you to get it right, when you are using default parameter, is where you don't pass any argument. This is where you don't pass any argument. For example, after you have your function definition, after you have your function definition, for you to pass a parameter, it means that you must enter some arguments in between the parentheses or in between those brackets. But when you have not entered any argument in between those brackets, that means that is a default parameter. What does it mean by a default parameter? You have not fed your brackets with anything. You have just left it as empty as that. As I told you that in passing this parameter, you can enter an empty argument, or you can enter an argument. What do I mean by saying entering an empty argument? When you enter an empty argument, that means you have not entered anything inside those brackets. So that means basically you have entered an empty argument. And when you have entered this empty argument, the program can only be able to count one range, either from 1 to 10, but it can do so 1, 2, up to infinite times. But when you have not done what we call now function definition, your program can only count from 1 to 10 only once. Okay, the other thing which I want you to learn, which is examinable in this chapter, I want you to learn about factorial. And as many of you know, what is the meaning of factorial? Because and I'm pretty sure many of you have passed through mathematics class. What is the meaning of factorial? For example, the teachers who are in high school, for example, when a guest of honors come to your school, I've seen these incidences where a teacher tells the student that I want you to clap 4 factorial. What does it mean by 4 factorial? It means you will clap at first 4 times, then 3 times, then 2 times, then once. So that is just a layman's definition of factorial. So, for example, you want to get 6 factorial. What is how are you going to get this 6 factorial? So this is where you will get 6 multiplied by 5, 4, 3, 2, then 1. So I've assigned my variable here is x. Then when I will call this variable x and I run the program, it will give me that 6 factorial is 720. And you have to know it can be done different way. At first, I can decide to do it that way, but for the second case, I decide to do it this way. I decide to do it this way. I'll say now 6. I'll say, excuse a minute. I'll say 6 is equal, I'll say x is equals to 6. Then in bracket, 5 multiplied by 4, multiplied by 3, multiplied by 2, multiplied by 1. And when I will call it, it will just give me the same results. So what does it mean by factorial? For example, you have been given 10 factorial in Python programming, and mathematically, you know how factorial is written. For example, when you have been asked to write 10 factorial, you put 10 with this sign. It is normally written this way. For example, 10 factorial, you just write it with this sign. This sign, which, yeah, I don't know what is its name. That is 10 factorial. So when you have been asked to find 10 factorial in Python programming, it is just simple, the same way you normally do it in mathematics. You just take 10 multiplied by 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, then 1. That is 10 factorial. Now, that was just a basic example. What if now we want now to make now a program that can compute factorial? We want to make a program that will be able to compute factorial. So how are we going to do that? We will use the function definition. And in the function definition, you have to keep in mind what you are about to compute is factorial, Then now you will just come and define now factorial. And I've told you time and again, when you are defining factorial, you say that means the program will compute factorial. So in function definition, we normally use an inbuilt function known as def. So you'll say def factorial. Then you want to do a factorial of any number from 0 up to infinite value, a factorial from 0 up to infinite value. How are you going to do that? You will come now and say, put in bracket, you have now to pass the parameter. I told you when you enter an argument inside the bracket, this is what we call now passing the parameter. And I told you after you have written now your definition, it has to end with a full colon. And then the second line now is I will follow it with an if condition. And if in an if condition also, I told you it has to end with a full colon, because now that is a condition. And after you have written a condition, it always has to be written with a block, followed with a block. What is a block? A block now is a body. It's a body that that line of code is supposed to execute. So I've written my definition, div factorial, then in bracket n, I've put here my full colon. Then for you now to get the indentation right, you have to put here your cursor and press enter. So where you see now my indentation here is peeping, where you see my indentation here is, where you see my cursor is popping up. That is where now I will start from that point to write now my if condition. But now I'd already written the if condition. So I'll say if n is equals to, as you recall from our first, I think the first or second lesson, when you want to say is equals to in Python, you normally put those double is equals sign. So if n is equals to 0, what are you expecting now Python uh, to execute? You say return 1. Why am I saying return 1? Now, the smallest number which you can compute a factorial is normally 0. And a factorial of 0 is normally 1. And you see here, we have said if n is equals to 0. It means you have assigned a variable n to 0. So it will give us the factorial of 1. Else, return n multiplied by the factorial of n minus 1. What does it mean? What does it mean? N's return n, n's return n multiplied by the factorial n minus 1. What does it mean? Look here. For example, when I wanted to get the factorial of 6, I told you the factorial of 6, I will take 6 multiplied by 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now I want to make a program that it will take into consideration all those numbers. So this first n This first n in that case will be my 6. Then multiply by now the factorial of n minus 1. You saw my next number was 5. And how did I get this 5? I took 6 minus 1. So that is why now you see here I'm taking now n minus 1. So that means it will take now the factorial of any number from 5 backwards. It will take the factorial of any number from 5 backwards. Then the last thing, which I will come and say, it is now the definition of main. I taught you in our last class what main stands for. This main is it just organizes our codes. Just organizes our codes. It gives now a proper outlook of our codes. So in this main, it is now I will now enter any number that I want my program to compute its factorial. For example, in this case, I want the program to compute the factorial of 0, 1, 6, 10, 15, and 20. And now, because I've defined main, for this main part of the body to be executed, I have to call it with the main function at the end. What do I mean by calling it with the main function at the end? For example, you saw very well when I was defining a program that can compute from 1 to 10. I started with the diff count to 10. So when I wanted this program to count from 1 to 10, each and every time I'll say count to 10, count to 10. So that is the same approach I'm using here. You saw I've defined the main, and this main, it is one. I want to find the factorial of 1, of 0, 1, 6, 10, 15, and 20. So for it to be called, I have to end it with the main function here at the end. So when I run this program, it will give me the factorial. The factorial of 0 is 1. Factorial of 1 is 1. 6 is 720. 10 is that number, 15, 20. What if now I want here, after it has computed the factorial of 1, I want to compute the factorial of 2. Then I want to compute the factorial of the 3. Then I want it to compute the factorial of 4. Then I want it to compute the factorial of 5. I'll just come there and I change factorial of 5 that way. And here I'll just change, I put here 2, 3, then 4, then 5. So when I run, you will see it will give me the factorial from 1 up to 5. It has given me the from 0 up to 5. It has given me the factorial of 0 is 1, then 1 is 1, 2 is 2, and 3 it is 2, because the factorial of 2, it will be 2 times 1. The factorial of 3 is 6, and it is true. The factorial of 3, it will be 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 1. The factorial of 4 is 24, and that is true, because it will be 4 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 1, and you get 24. And the factorial of 5 is 120. That means it is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that is the thing also which is very important for you to get. You have to know how to what is a factorial in Python programming, and how to compute factorial. And I've given you 2 examples. The first example is where now, for example, you are finding the factorial of 6. We just do it as a basic mathematics. And the second example is where now we used now the program. We come up with a program to compute the factorials in Python programming. So this is another program which you can just use it again to compute. This is another method that you can use now to compute the factorial. I've given you the first method here, the first approach. Now, in this one, now you can use now the loop. You use the loop method, and also you can follow the same approach to compute the factorial. This example, it is the same as the one which we did in chapter 7. It is just the same as the one which we did in chapter 7. But yeah, it is just the same. I don't see any difference, so I'll not pass through it. Okay, so I've told you that in this example, where now we were generating the same code as the way we were doing in chapter 7. We are generating the code that we can use to compute the GCD. It is just the same thing what we are using in chapter 7. So the only difference between chapter 7 and now chapter 8, in chapter 7 we were introducing now a functions definition. But when it comes now to chapter 8, the only thing which this topic wanted the trainees to get it right is the difference between local and global variable. And the second thing is how to compute factorials in Python programming. In the last example, I remembered I showed you how to do the GCD, and this is just different approaches of how to do the same. You saw we did the GCD without using the main function, and also we did now the GCD where we were using the main function. And in that case where we were using the main function, you saw the program was able to give us an option where you can to give us an option where you can now enter numbers. You can now enter numbers without writing the inbuilt function or the defined function GCD. So in this case now, it is where now you can find the same GCD, but in this finding the same GCD, you see the difference now here. In this finding the same GCD, the number has already been fed. The number has already been fed in this program. And this program, as you can see, it has counted the GCD, for example, of 5 and 10, up to up to 100 and 100. So in this case, you see now the number has already been fed, and that number ranges all the way from 0 up to 100. It ranges all the way from 0 up to 100. But all in all, for you to find a GCD or LCM in Python programming, you have to use what we call function definition. The other thing, thing, you can make functions reusable. How can you make function reusable? How can you make a function reusable? So for you to, for example, you want to find the square root, and also when you want to find this square root, you want to find if a number is a prime number or not. So that is one application where now you can make a function reusable. and you have to apply functions definition. How will you apply function definition in this case? When now you will follow those codes, you will see now I've imported from math, I've imported sqrt, that is square root. Then I've defined my function, and my function here is prime. You want to find if a number is prime or not. So the trial factor is 2. What is now this trial factor to be 2? Uh, that means the smallest prime number, the smallest prime number is 2. Mathematically, the smallest prime number is 2. Then I've set my root, and after I've set my root, I said my root is equals to sqrt, which in this case is n in bracket. Why am I putting n in bracket? This means this n, I want my program now to accept any number from 0 up to infinite value. Then I'm creating now the loop, while trial factor is less or is equals to 0. So I'm trying to create the loop. I'm trying to create the loop. By creating those loops, it will allow this function. It will allow this program to be reusable. That is why I told you one application of infinite loops. It is in web development websites. Why do they use infinite loop? Because infinite loop enable the site to run 24/7. That is just an application of this infinite loop. It allows the program to run 24/7. So when I run this line of a code, that is this code above is just an example. It's just an example of how function can be made to be reusable. So that is all. That is all in this chapter. I don't see any other thing that you might require that it is of utmost importance in this chapter. No, I don't see any other thing, because as I've told you earlier, in this chapter, what is important in chapter 8, because we have covered almost everything about functions definition. In chapter 8, the only thing you are required to grasp is for you to know the difference between a local variable and a global variable, and how to do factorials in Python programming. How to do factorials in Python programming. Those are two major things that you are required to know in this chapter 8. And I've elaborated between a global variable and a local variable after I gave you an example of how to compute now a factorial manually. And also we made a program which you can use to compute this factorial. After that, I gave you the characteristics of a local variable, and also I gave you the characteristics of a local variable, and that is the only thing which you need to know, because in chapter 7 we have done all definitions and all applications of how you can define now these variables. In chapter 8, it was just like a wrap up for you to distinguish between a local variable, global variable, properties of a local variable, and then how to do factorial in Python programming, and then just how to make a simple program that can compute factorial in Python programming. And that is all. Uh, that is all that we can. That it is in chapter 7. Any question? Let me see why this one was giving me an error. I want you also to, for example, sometimes when you get an error like this and you don't want to pass through a lot of things, I will encourage you to have ChatGPT. You just go and consult ChatGPT and it will tell you, because that code had some error. Just go and consult ChatGPT. a little bit. I'm still getting the same. I don't know. Yeah, I'll just look at it and I'll tell you. I'll send you this. I don't know why it is not giving it right. Okay, that is everything about chapter 8, unless you have got any question.
Okay.
Do you have any question? Any question? Okay, if there is no question, this is plan.